I'm gonna call this meeting to order. Wow, it's a little scratchy. It is 4:59. Next up, I need a motion to approve the agenda for the January 23rd, 2024 board workshop meeting. Mary Caitlin? Nicole? All in favor? Aye. 7-0. My gavel down. And we have two workshop topics tonight, so we're excited. First up, we have STEM, STEAM.
Science, technology,
Technology.
engineering, art, and math.
Yep.
Right?
Programming and Fairport presented by Travis Wood, our instructional coach, and Stacy Miller, our MST director, and Bob Clark from the high school.
Before we jump into that, though, really quickly, I truly believe that there's two creations. You know, there's the mental creation. You need to make sure that you have a strong mental visualization before you can actually do the actual physical work. Anything that we've done in the last few years, I think we were talking about this earlier, Dr. White, you know, what are the things we're most proud of? It's the things that when we take ideas, visions, expectations, and then they come to fruition. And I really am pleased and excited about what's being developed, not just about the STEAM edition here at Fairport High School. That's a very important part of the whole picture, but from a curriculum and instruction standpoint, pieces that impact all of our students. I'm grateful that the board's investing time and giving resources to these amazing leaders that we have in front of us. So, Dr. T and team.
Thank you so much for having us tonight. And as Superintendent Provenzano said, it is so much more than just the physical structure. And the physical structure has allowed us to do something that we really needed to do, which was examine our programming. We say that we're preparing future-ready Raiders, right? And we actually don't know what the future looks like. So we need to go back to our programming and forecast forward what does our society, will our society need in the next 5, 10, 20 years? And can we create spaces and programs and curriculum that will prepare our students for work and college when they leave us? That's our imperative, right? So I'm going to turn it over to the team. We have done quite a few school visits. We've worked with consultants in the Board of Education as well as students to get student voice. We have a current status of our STEAM programming as it stands and our equipment as it stands today. And then we'll share our next steps that we're recommending to Superintendent Provenzano.
So some of this work did start before coming into this position. So some of the things that obviously that I have done before was the Fairport for the Future CIP vote. Prior to us coming along, Labella had done a lot of work with Bob and Kristen and the team to do some user group meetings with the building and district stakeholders, so included a variety of people, students, teachers, administrators. They all went out and participated in a visualization exercise facilitated by Labella in fall of 2022. And then students went through several exercises and presented their ideas in an effort to envision this series of new spaces. So brings us to now, when Travis and I jumped on board with Bob and Labella, we've been doing a bunch of auditing of what our current programs are. Obviously, once the vote passed, which is very exciting, we fast forward to figuring out, okay, now we got to get to the planning stages and all of the pieces that come along. But we did not want to rush into making full-on decisions without having a full view of what we want for our students, for our future programs. So we're taking a very comprehensive look at what we currently are doing, what's available around and beyond. So we'll kind of go through some of those steps with you all today. So in the next slide, let's see if we can go one more. So this is part of the user group that went out to Labella and did the visioning exercises. So you can see there's a variety of people that were involved in that. Moving forward, just so you guys can kind of see, I'm a visual person, so I like to see. Next slide. And then that came out of the visualization summary. So basically what the kids, and maybe Troy, you might be able to speak better to this, and Bob, but this is what the kids kind of came up with after doing this.
Absolutely. Thanks, Stacey. So the students that participated at the time were fully aware that they weren't going to be here to reap the benefits of their hard work and their input. But nonetheless, that didn't deter them at all from sharing their opinion on a lot of things. We went through a series of exercises in rapid succession, and just going through like spaces that could be a part of the addition, what they envisioned them to be, and what really resonated with them. And it was interesting from time to time of like, hey, well, you said you like this, well, tell us why. And they would, and then it would be amazing how their opinions would change after hearing things from their peers and from teachers that were there, and how some things for them wouldn't change, and they held steadfast on collaborative spaces, being open and bright, and very inviting, very inclusive spaces that are adaptable, and that are somewhat more looking towards and more geared towards them being acclimated to going off to college and going off into the working world, and nothing that was typical that you would see in a K through 12 environment. So there are some things there that that they felt also strongly about, was like a brand of Fairport identity that they see is already being invested in here and is already developing and wanting to progress that further.
Yeah, I wouldn't add too much more than that. I just thought, standing off on the side, Brett and I got to basically watch most of that organic process take place. And a lot of the stuff that they selected was similar to the things that our students had selected when we designed the cafeteria, in terms of the lighting, in terms of the open spaces and stuff. So I think it was affirming for us, for Troy and I, conceptually, to understand, like we knew we were pushing for 5 classrooms. We knew they weren't going to be boxes, and so they influence things, even with regards to the space between the buildings, where our current building juts out and where the addition would be, and what could we do with the courtyard, and could that be a learning space. So that was some of the stuff that we were picking up on from that experience, and they did it pretty quickly, actually. It's the second time we've done it, and they just do such a nice job of defending their vision boards, and giving them an opportunity to have voice in that process.
I just want to say first, thank you for the opportunity to share, and thank you for the opportunity to work on this project. This is kind of a project of a lifetime. And it really comes as we start to think about, we're doing a couple of things at the same time. We're working on physical spaces, but we're also thinking about programming, and how our programming transitions or translate from K to eventually when the kids wind up in this beautiful new space that we're conceptualizing right now. So Fairport future ready, Fairport forward, as we head down that way where the arrow's pointing. This is how we're thinking it. So I'll speak a little bit to where we are with programming, and how our continuum of opportunities for our students has begun already with your support of the Spark Labs at K5. Our first group is through now and in 6th grade. So next year they'll be 7th graders, and right when they're going to be rolling into the high school, that first group of Spark will be rolling into the high school.
That's a plan.
As the building's ready. So what we see in terms of programming is the kind of the continuum of opportunities for our students is that our kids in elementary school work through Spark. We'll talk a little bit about programming. We've talked about it lots of times, but we can talk about it just briefly again. But then as kids roll into 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, it flips from Spark to the tech department. Kids currently take a half year in 7th and 8th grade in tech, and then they roll up here to the high school for electives. So to speak a little bit to what we're doing in the Spark Labs, we are focusing pretty heavily on the next gen science standards, and those standards we're really focusing on the engineering and design thinking principles, mostly the engineering stuff, but we're also really focused on the computer science and digital fluency learning standards. In there is computer science, essentially coding, and then we're doing a lot of digital production in the labs as well from what we're working on there. We thought we were complete with just those standards, but what we've really discovered is that the labs are also a really great place for us to work on soft skills and social emotional learning. To that end, we as a Spark Lab team have decided that every single opportunity that we put in front of kids, we have a technical learning target and a social emotional learning target. And it's really been eye-opening what we can do with social emotional learning in these opportunities too. I just finished working through the Blue Ribbon report, and throughout that is soft skills and SEL learning. And I think that this is an opportunity in these spaces. It seems to me that in the tech spaces and in the hands-on spaces, we have a lot of opportunity that we can also wiggle in social emotional learning. So we're presently doing that with our K-5 students with the vision of forward thinking. How do we spiral that up? So not only are we learning technical skills, but job skills, social emotional learning, collaboration for, you know, the 4 C's as we go. So we did a quick lab. We did a lab. A 4th grade group did one with storm surge, and we did a short background information. We watched a time-lapse video of storm surge from the Tampa hurricane not this past fall, but the fall before. So the kids understood what storm surge was, and we said, how can we protect or prepare humans to save themselves from storm surge? So we put on some criteria and constraints with that. So they had to build, obviously they're working on the engineering portion. There's a little bit of the science of storms that comes into that as well. But we also, as we send kids off, we're working in groups in that. So we'll give them something to focus on. It might be about collaboration. And we might say, we're also thinking about collaboration, and we're working how you talk to your partner when you have different ideas. So as you're working through this, your learning target is, you know, I can share my ideas with my partner, and we can arrive at a kind of a middle ground. So we
Amicable.
Yes, without throwing down or breaking the thing apart, or making 2, because oftentimes kids want to make 2. So that's that kind of in practice.
You said soft skills, which, you know, employer.
Yep.
I can see so many applications to what employers and folks consider soft skills.
And I think if we start them where we are at K-5, then hopefully we can trickle that up, you know. So these are the Castle standards. That's what we've used in the lab. We can use the New York State social emotional learning standards as well. So the overall framework of what we're using in the lab looks similar to that. The engineering and design thinking is a pillar. Computational thinking is a pillar that we work off of, and communications, it's a general term for content production, telling stories, using whatever content tool that you'd like to use there. But we felt like those 3 pillars alone didn't have the bar of social emotional learning ties it all together, and we think that that's something that we could possibly transfer upwards. This is just kind of a learning cycle that we run off of in the labs at elementary, and it's really about that square where kids are improving, building, and playing, and that's that iterative cycle of thinking, where we might get there, we might not get there, but it's the idea that we're that iteration, and where we're trying to go with that. So where does that leave us? Our mission obviously follows what you're all asking for us to have as our mission. We say it briefly. If you ask us an elevator pitch if you asked any of the Spark Lab teachers an elevator pitch of what we do, we open doors for kids. Our job is to introduce kids to things that they didn't know that they love yet, or they didn't know existed yet, and it happens all the time. Just this year, we had one of the kids at JA tell Tracy Tingu, who's the teacher over there, I didn't know that I loved code, but thank you for introducing me to it. So, you know, those opportunities are powerful. And in some preliminary work with the middle schools, I think they're feeling very strongly that it's kind of the same idea of their approach, like opening doors for kids to things that they didn't know about, you know, working in the wood shop or continuing on with code or some robotics or different avenues. And really we see like opportunities to open doors for our kids so that when they get here to the high school, the courses, the pathways, CTE, whatever it might be, are really desirable to them, and that we're preparing kids to head off into highly technical environments, whether it's for college or career or whatever it might be, entrepreneurship, that we're preparing kids and opening doors, not only like for topics that they might not know, but pathways.
So Travis, I was wondering if you could, and on the next slide, this kind of gets at the question, and you know where I'm going with this. We have talked about this numerous
Sure.
times, but we've got the Spark Labs at the elementary school, which when we visit an elementary school is like, they love it more than lunch. Like it is clearly their favorite part, and they love it. And you guys are doing such great work there. They get to the high school, and the electives and the space that we're going to be building is great. You look at that selection flow chart, and you see tech, and I do not mean to degrade what tech is doing and the great work they're doing, but you have this great energy coming in Spark Lab K to 5, and then they get to middle school, and I have a middle schooler. I know Jan has a middle schooler right now, and they just kind of like don't have as many. They don't have that spark carrying over to the middle school right now. So, and I know it's happening individually and in classes and in some work, but systematically, what are we doing, or what can we do to kind of make so there's not that drop off in middle school, that there's that bridge to the high school?
So I'll just answer that briefly, Brian. We actually have started to insert some of that into our 7th and 8th grade, and Travis and Stacy are working really hard with our team on where we're headed next so that we are bridging that gap. I actually did a walkthrough when Travis had been there the previous days before in the tech classroom, and he introduced a coding challenge, which was create a locker sensor. And so I got to be there on the day they tested the locker sensor, and it was very exciting. It was a lot of collaboration and conversation, and I actually had a conversation very similar to the one Travis just heard from Tracy, which a kiddo, he got it on the first try, his code worked. I was like, you are very good at this. And he's like, well, you know, my dad does coding. He taught me a long time ago, and I just didn't like it. I'm like, but you're good at it. And he's like, yeah, I know. I think I like it. Right? And so it was just that one more introduction from something different, from somebody that wasn't his dad. You know how our kids don't like to listen to us. But we are starting to bridge and create those opportunities. So we're doing complete, comprehensive programming review.
Yeah, that's
Just to, I don't want to get too deep in the weeds in here, so if I am, just tell me and I'll stop. But the 7th and 8th grade is great, but that 6th grade, that year where they're in middle school and they're just coming off of 5th grade, and I know there's programmatic concerns and scheduling and meaningful stuff that they have to have in. I'm just wondering, like, to keep that momentum going even more, so there's not.
That's the purpose of this exercise, and I think that's the purpose of asking the board for a strong vision statement that helps us build and continue to do curriculum audits. And you know, that's the goal, is to feed off and spiral what's happening 5 to go 6. And I don't know if you ever arrive. I know that, you know, we're trying to continually, you know, add pieces in, as Dr. T just spoke to, and I think the team's going to continue to develop. But as we develop budgets, you should be seeing and expecting, if that's the board's will, and I believe that it is, that it does spiral, and then you give the professionals time and resources to do it. And I think that's going to be exciting.
Is this something, so I know our amazing Sparks teachers, the teach day during the summer where you offer professional development to each other, do you see kind of other content area teachers trying to like learn some of this stuff from their colleagues?
It's definitely transferring in the content production areas for sure. Kids are utilizing the tools.
I would add.
Good, yeah.
Yeah, just overall with next gen learning standards and the new implementation of all of our math and science curriculum, you're going to see some of those changes, even with some of the ELA, right? All of those pieces require more engagement and 3D learning and all the pieces that would be involved in what we do in Spark. Similarly, what we've done, you know, we're working on an audit, right? So we are seeing, so this next slide shows you like, we're going to present like where we are. And so this is kind of one of the things that we did, right? We notice there is a gap in a year, but then we also notice there are a lot of opportunities, and some of the opportunities provide various pathways for kids. There are a lot. So if you look, like one of the biggest things I noticed when I created the flow chart is there's only one connector. And so what does that mean? That means that kids can hop on at any part of the pathway. So if there's something of interest to them, there isn't a limitation of, oh, I had to have taken this first to then be able to do this. And so that was one of the things that I thought was really nice, because as kids develop, we know there's interests that spark at one point, and then there's another interest that spark at another, because that's just normal. And so I thought what was cool that stood out to me as I was doing kind of a program audit of just what do we offer, there really is only one connector. The other piece that you can notice too is there are dual credit options. And so for students who choose pathways and want to take tech pathways, they can get some other college credits in, and they're not necessarily SUPA. You could get it through MCC. And so, you know, there's a lot of opportunities there for kids. If you notice at Minerva, which, you know, for the 9th grade group, DDP is an option outside of a music or art credit. So again, a lot of kids take that class, and it also gives you a dual credit. So just knowing that there's a lot of options for kids that we already currently have. And so what we're using, kind of the knowledge and that we've put into Spark, is kind of to look vertically at like, okay, so if a kid finds a pathway in this, where does that land for them in our programming? And so that's informing future work and decisions, like not quite yet, but to your point, yeah, there are some gaps there that we notice. And so if you ever wanted to get in there, like the descriptions are all in there, but I just thought that was something that was helpful for me to organize it into a flow chart so I could see where everything lands.
Just a side question. When our
Sure.
kids take these dual credit classes or the SUPA classes, do they have to pay for those credits, or is that,
I was just gonna make a comment
how
about
much is that, what does that cost
It's,
look like?
yeah, because I think some of us probably have paid for it in
Yeah.
the past, and I've asked this question
I
many
have
times.
tiny people, so I don't.
So it ranges. Go ahead, Bob.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have the tuition fees like in my head. I think a SUPA class can be is probably the most expensive option. It's a couple $1,000s, but there's financial aid available if we direct them to that. You know, the same with the MCC credits are. I think
200.
I don't think there's a reduction in the MCC price because it's based on the SUNY rate. But actually all 3 of my children now have gotten MCC credit. You know, through this. My son more recently doing the tech options. So it's available for people.
I may be wrong, but the SUPA wasn't close to that when we paid for it last year.
We haven't run the SUPA class in information tech in a while.
So does it vary from SUPA Psych and SUPA
Yeah.
other things? Oh, they
The price can vary.
Right, I think
between-
it's like
science.
$250 and up.
And then whenever there's a family in need,
Right.
Yeah, there is. Yeah.
and the teachers make this announcement that if you need support, that we have support available for you. So it's it can be a little tricky to navigate sometimes, the SUPA stuff and the MCC credits and all of that, but our counselors are well equipped to help our students. So it's we don't bar anybody from earning any dual credits.
Okay, and if
Yeah.
our counselors are on it.
Yeah, they're on
They're
it.
helping them pass the
Absolutely.
course setup.
Yep.
Yeah, they're
Yep.
So as the board's looking at developing clear vision expectations and statements, you know, that component, you know, developing pathways, resources, so all students can access it.
And just so you said some of these haven't run, right? A lot of them depend on interest, correct? Like if there has to
Correct.
be a certain number.
Yeah, I haven't run the tech.
That's the one I'm like, I've never seen that.
I mean, I think it's based on information systems, and my father that worked at IBM for 40 years could tell you what that is. It started with big computers, and it changed over time.
Big computers.
I think part of the curriculum is based on that, but I usually typically only have 5 or 6 kids that are interested in that, and we just haven't had the means to run it. Same with web design is a class that like cycles. Sometimes I run, sometimes I don't.
And that's one of those things that, right, we're hoping with that Spark background and kind of fostering that love and passion that we will look into what's the next, like, because we don't know, right? What is the next most exciting thing?
Well, honestly, I think
Um,
program review, the benefit of program review, which we have not done a ton of that in Fairport, we just haven't. We've come to it of late, and it's so great for us programmatically with the work that Kristen started and that Stacy's picked up in math. Now you're seeing this, like we're at the base level in technology. You know, Stacy went back and looked for records on guidance from the state of New York, and would you say it was 1987?
1980s. It's so sad that it's not been
So-
tended to.
So the beauty in programmatic review is that you get to look at the whole thing, but most school districts don't have a K-12 tech program, and so identifying the fact that we're trying to grow this and identify those gaps, it's probably going to take us 3 to 5 years, and I would argue that web design was a very, very important facet of that, 5 years ago, and it's not as much anymore. Again, the way things have changed with our phones and our systems,
Like
So
cybersecurity, you know.
I wouldn't, yeah, I wouldn't be
so-
surprised if there was a different course that evolves through that program review and the identification of what students are heading into down the road. And that's always been the case with elective non-core areas.
And that's a perfect pathway to what we were kind of using our initial site visits for us as a team to kind of look at and see what was out there. And that's kind of guiding us in like helping figure out, okay, well, what could the ultimate space look like to be able to be flexible, to adapt to whatever we need it to be. And so these were kind of the steps that we followed for that. So the next piece would be our site visits, of which we visited and or researched the following: Rush Henrietta, West Irondequoit, Penfield, Webster, Churchville, Chi-Lite, and Pittsford. And we had like a checklist when we did the site visits of all the things we were kind of like looking for and asking about. And so these are just some of our trends that we noticed. That majority, if not all, had some sort of mechanical programming, small gas engines, consumer auto, engine operation and maintenance of some sort, wood or construction, course offerings from like very basic to super complex, from woodworking basics, design and build, construction systems and advanced construction, electronics and engineering courses, robotics course and club. And then some of the additional offerings that kind of didn't really fit in some of those were metal technology and land and sea, which obviously if you get closer towards the water, the lake, that's where those were offered. But some of the
So they were
Yeah, they
doing,
had some-
like, they would study. It was a transportation systems course, and they were
Just
studying
different systems.
like vehicles on land, vehicles on water. They were studying vehicles in the air.
Components
They were building and shooting rockets and measuring forces, and it was pretty cool.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's just kind of an overview. And then one of the biggest things, too, that we were noticing about the physical space that kind of gave us a good idea of what we felt like moving forward, not that we want to model against everybody else, but thinking about what's really important, having a flexible space and be able to have dirty and clean spaces as creation happens in building, and the iterative process of that. Organized with ample storage and dual purpose furniture seemed to be the most integral in its flexible spaces. Spacious, tall ceilings, well ventilated. You could definitely tell the difference in those spaces when we went and visited between the two, or the few spaces that we visited. Garage doors to the outside for some of those spaces that have those bigger items coming in and out for their production. And there was some schools that did have garage doors between the dirty and clean spaces, or some sort of transition door between those spaces where they were able to work from one to the other, depending on what they were producing. So
What does the excuse me, the garage doors to the outside, what does that look like from a safety security standpoint?
I think it's all lockable.
It's all lockable.
Yeah.
You have them now.
Yeah. Yeah, I would just say we have garage doors on this facility, and
Again,
So,
some of
yeah.
the residential structures courses, like they're building framing for
So you
large
need-
sheds. They need that access to have that outside space.
It will be something that will not be compromised.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So with that kind of gave us an idea of like what our, neighboring districts are, right? So there are some pictures of some of the things, and some of those spaces were renovated spaces, and some of them were not. And even the ones that were like age old, we just learned a lot from how they took care of their spaces with the storage and that flexible use. So, go ahead.
Can you go back one?
Yeah, of
So-
course. This
so
one?
the top left picture shows the kind of one of those transition spaces where the garage door would be inside. The space in the right portion of that would be more of a classroom type space, and the space on the left was a wood shop, which gives like kids flow. The center space shows what the profile of a lift looks like with a car there. So the profile of the lift was pretty narrow, and definitely it's easy to work around. We talked about clean storage. The bottom left is a bank of 3D printers. We don't love the fact that they're on folding tables, but we do love the fact that they are uniform, so that when a kid goes in there, that they know what they're doing with each of the machines, because they're all the same. In the separate room, they had some larger format and higher end 3D printers, but this was a bank that they could utilize that were all similar, which we liked a lot. The bottom picture on the right just shows kind of the free flowing of the space. It was pretty open, so that's definitely one thing that we liked. The next pick page has 2 pictures on it. This was pretty cool. We talk about adaptable furniture. The left picture, those are desktops, and now those desks are manually. You push the laptops or the desktops right down in. There's a little tabletop that flops over the top of it, and now those are miniature workspaces too. Now they're not going to be super heavy duty to be pounding nails on, but you can glue things and screw things together. It was pretty cool how those worked. And then the last picture on the right is a robotic space. Each of the places that we visited had some dedicated robotic storage space. And this was a robotics closet that was fairly narrow, pretty long, but this was purely dedicated to the club, and their stuff was able to be stored in there neatly and accessible for the kids to use in their after-school meetings.
I'm just curious, can I ask a question? In your travels, when you went around to all these different places, did you see anything that really identified a space for maybe the A in STEAM? I feel like a lot of this is tech heavy, and I'm loving what I'm seeing through some of the maker spaces in different places where they have a space for more of a creative, artistic space for kids, where they maybe have like sewing machines, embroidery, maybe a color cricket machine where you can make those things where you're actually, it's not like crafting, but it's like it's creating something with a technology spin to it. And I just didn't know if you saw
Yes, we actually, so a lot of people had separate art spaces, and so we knew that our vision would have to be inclusive of a space that would be dynamic and have that flexibility, right? So that goes into Troy, if you want a little bit, to kind of present what this space looks like, but that.
I just want to jump
Bob,
in
why
real
don't you
quick.
jump in?
I just
Bob
want
has
to
a
talk
vision
about that.
around
The thing that, excuse me, I think the thing that we recognized going through this from the outset, I remember when we started having this conversation 7 years ago, we were just talking about the fact that our tech spaces are 60 years old, right? And I think from the get-go, we've been focused on how we can make this more of an inclusive space, and recognizing that a lot of our art coursework has changed and is more digitally based. You know, we used to have a dark room, and we no longer use that blackout space because they don't produce photography that way anymore. We brought in, Tom's team brought in things like Wacom tablets that could be used by our architecture class and technology, and also our graphic design classes. And so the combination of the technology really brought those things together. And what I would share with you in terms of the visitation versus what we have the opportunity to do is not one school district in Monroe County, and not too many places probably around New York State, actually have a new structure. Everyone else is building to existing conditions. And so we saw some really great spaces, and sometimes you had to go out into the hallway and down and take a jog to the left and then upstairs. Like, it wasn't in the same space. And one of the things that I think I'm most excited about is, again, in terms of the proximity and Troy's planning and our vision for this over the last 7+ years now, is that it's directly across from the art hallway, the space that we're talking about sharing, and the potential to use that courtyard as an instructional space as they walk across and they're taking photos inside, outside, and using that digital space is incorporated into that. But you're not going to see that anywhere else because everyone else is making do with what they have, which is what we've done. And we saw everywhere we went, even some of the storage that we saw is homemade. You know, a lot of tech teachers are like the geniuses of entrepreneurship. Like, I have 15 hammers. How do I store them? Nobody makes a tool storage unit for 15 hammers, so they make their own. We'll have different types of storage. We'll have from the jump measuring storage that fits the equipment that we have. That's some of the work that we're doing right now. So I know Troy get into his design, but no one else has this opportunity.
Thanks, Bob. So similar to what we did when we embarked on our design of the science classrooms, we sat with the teachers. We, took stock of everything that they do, how they function from day to day, from preparing their lessons to what needs to be taken out at night and left out, what needs to be stored away as they're, preparing classes, mixing chemicals and so on. and working with them to see, what their storage needs were, what the different sizes of things that needed to be put away. So we're going to be going through that same lengthy process here as we've kind of identified. So if you look at the drawing here, that's kind of up on the screen. I want to make sure the colors there are the same as the colors I'm looking at. If you kind of look at what's red and what's somewhat orange. So the red is what we kind of thought about as what would potentially be, as we were talking to the teachers, full height storage, maybe things that would obstruct views, just to kind of get them in the mindset of this is how your new space may operate. We say it's going to be flexible, but there may be give and take, and as to how you lay things out, as to how it currently operates, and just to jog their thought process. And they were like, well, maybe we don't want that there, or maybe we can do away with such tall storage and we go to lower storage because we want to prioritize being able to be over in one space and see the kids over in another space. And that's kind of where we're starting right now. So if you look at the space to the far left, you can see we've got like a dashed outline. You can barely see it there. That shows potential space for maybe fitting 5 cars in there with one lift. And that's just something that they kind of advocated for being able to have like 2 or 3 kids to a vehicle, whether it's changing tires, brakes, oil or so on, while there may be some others over there in instruction. There may be some others there in welding, but you've got a wide open space where a wide variety of things can take place all at the same time with, maybe 1 or 2 teachers in there overseeing everything. Then we have adjoining classrooms. You'll see like the spaces with the blue furniture. So those are what we are considering to be like flexible classroom or clean spaces, where you can basically do anything in there from multimedia production to photography to anything that building in for robotics class and so on. The space in the middle, there is a small room there. We looked at a photo earlier on where we saw like 3D printers. And we thought this would be a cool spot. Like, what if you're coming down that main hallway and you're just looking through this nicely lit glass space and you see all these 3D printers just churning away. And it also is very accessible in this location, because if anyone's ever tried to 3D print anything, it's not instantaneous. It takes a while. So you might set a project to go off to another class, come back, peep through the window, see what's going on, or pop in to see if you've ran out of like a spool or something and reload it and keep going. So that's kind of how we envision those 3 spaces to work in concert with the other 2 tech spaces on either side. The larger one to the far right being the wood shop, which it's more what we envision to be of like a dirty shop where there's going to be dust and so on, but it could also potentially be like a large maker space where other disciplines coming down can use that space. Same for the auto shop side, where we'll be doing welding and metal fabrication and so on. In terms of being able to function along with, say, art, we'll have space for welding. We'll have space where they can have different kinds of machines that can cut different types of media, textiles, and so on. So there's a lot of opportunity there for like a mixed media type project that you may not have now. That you can look at doing in the future.
That we can grow into.
That you can grow into, especially that.
Yeah, that middle space that he's referring to where the 3D printers are, that's kind of like our envision of a maker space, kind of where you would be able to be flexible enough so NASA would run some of their classes out of there. But that would be another place where you could, you would need to get in to do something in the woodworking area, or perhaps with metals, and so that flexibility. And then with the 3D printing, and maybe perhaps we add in, the sewing, that would be the place of the production, where the maker space would happen, the pre-production, and then up.
And that's what, honestly, I know you're sitting there laughing, like the lift, right? I mean, that's what sold me, is that we're going to be able to do the things that we have not been able to do, or that we have yet to see and understand. So we're able to get the best of both worlds. I mean, with e-vehicles out there, that's a systems approach. The brakes still need to be, managed and understood. The system on an e-vehicle needs to be understood.
You still got a tire, you still got air, you still got brakes, you still got basic systems.
So the team really did a
good
job of calming my fears that, there's a vision here because of what you just said about all these other wonderful pieces that could still come in if you just coordinate the space as you guys are developing.
I would just try to remember also, we're going to be renovating 2 of our art rooms before we even get here. And I think the space will drive the future of the art program just as much as it does the technology program. We only have, and this is the challenge, we only have 3 teachers in both areas. When we merge with Minerva Deland, we pick up 2 teachers from, each discipline area as well. They're relatively small departments, and we have to be mindful that we don't create too many courses. As it is, we have, you've approved over the years special language in the contract so that we can do what's a little bit unique. In core area, teachers don't teach more than 3 preps. It's pretty common in this area to teach 4 and 5 preps at times because of student interest. And so again, having a larger department might develop additional courses that can incorporate all of the great things that this opportunity will provide.
I know the Artist in Residence program currently runs out of the corner of one of the art classrooms, and they don't really have their own space. They're kind of like just behind these little, cubicle areas. So it would be great if they had a dedicated space where they can kind of spread out a little bit more.
I don't want to overpromise.
Yeah.
Right? The reason the Artist in Residence is like this is because it's not a certified teacher, and it's only 5 kids, and there's an artist, a local artist that works in that program, but they have to be embedded in a classroom with a
So they
certified
can
teacher.
eyes on, yeah.
So but to your point, when we redo the art rooms, there's a lot of old, chunky furniture in these spaces. The square footage, Troy would tell you, is not bad.
It's not, and it's a matter of coming up with systems for storing away projects, which is very important, but also maybe it's time to throw away some things that there are newer instruments to make things smaller, to be more efficient. It's true. I mean, you might love this giant thing that does this one thing, but there might be something else that probably does 2 other things as well.
The furniture that's in that room that you're talking about is from the library from 1980.
Yeah.
So that's one of those things we need to kind of get after.
Can I?
Yeah.
I have 2, I think, quick questions. Along with the arts, with the programmatic review that you're doing, does that include the art programs and seeing like what classes are?
Again, so that's a separate conversation. We need I think what it speaks to is a cycle of programmatic review, and I don't want to get too far into Dr. T's world, but that's, I was handing it right over. I can share with you, there was a time 3 or 4 years ago where the art department did an internal review, 912, and reduced the number of courses that they offer because of what we just talked about in the number of preps. And what they did is combine aspects of, let's say, working in different mediums and fibers and jewelry making and combine them with other courses. So I think that is an ongoing process at the high school. We do it through a department review, but as part of a larger programmatic piece, that's the work of Dr. T to do the K-12 piece.
Yeah, and one of the pieces on the horizon for us is AP Art. And that has a lot to do with pathways and seals and endorsements. And we know from the Blue Ribbon Commission that is the future, probably where we're headed with different pathways. So that AP Art course is going to allow us to offer that. And also open the door of AP to even wider swath of children who are interested.
Thanks. My other question, so I see the 2 like dirty spaces, the like auto lab and the woodworking, which I'm also in my mind is like loud spaces, not as dirty spaces.
Sure.
So what are like the walls and dividers and there?
So we intentionally isolated the 2 classrooms that are to the top of to the top of the page as being more of a quieter space, even to the point of the classroom in the middle that's part of the maker space that we envision as being like somewhat of a noisy workroom type space. You're going to be using like smaller tools and so on in there, and it's adjacent to the wood shop. So for that matter, we've started going down the path of like, well, right now it's just walls with furniture, but there's structure that needs to happen and mechanical equipment that needs to go on the roof. So the way we've structured, if you look at the kind of the perspective on the right hand side, you'll see like the roof line kind of pops up in the middle. So that's where all our mechanical equipment is going to go. That's where the compressor that serves the wood shop and the auto shop is going to go. So we're trying our best to isolate all that noise and dirt and disturbance and everything to one side of it, because there's just no way you're going to get away from it. And, it's as best as we can here.
When we did the professional development, I know they looked at some spaces that were wide open across all of it. So that was sort of my question. So there are
Yeah,
Well, then
there's
there's
real
that
walls.
divider. I appreciate that. Speaking of the roof line, can you talk me through like what? I don't know how finalized this is, but aesthetic wise, if we're talking about you wanted to bring in larger lumber to the workshop, and then it has the smaller roof and then the taller roof with the windows, is that?
It's much higher than you think. I would
Yeah.
say. It's like 20
not the
feet
scale.
in some elevations.
The tallest portion there where you see like the band of windows going across the top, that's going to be about like 22 feet high.
Okay.
So there's going to be good clearance there. All of this right now is just conceptual, so I can start laying it out so the structural engineer can start sizing structure, and we'll work with mechanical to start sizing beams. And as we keep doing that, things kind of move up and down, and we get the price, and then it moves a bit down.
And then it comes down.
So-
and this will all be air conditioned?
There's certainly going to be air
Yes.
conditioning in there.
Yes.
I try to go a long around way just to hear Brett like jump in and say,
Yeah, I mean, it's. Can't believe you hesitated. We've been practicing that, Troy.
And you try to remember, we're the only school around here that has to incorporate a NASA program also.
Yeah.
Which is
And
great.
we're excited about that. And that'll be in that makerspace area in the
That's
center.
awesome.
And have access, because they would use pretty much all 4 rooms around it,
Mm-hmm.
the way that they build things. 'Cause we don't really know what they use. They make it up every
Yep.
Yeah.
from scratch.
And they're all a part of this conversation too when we're talking about what's going in this space and how
Yeah.
we're gonna be working smarter, not harder, not adding a bunch of stuff. We're gonna try to
And
be
they'll
good
get
at
to share
sharing.
tools.
Sharing.
Sharing.
Yeah. All right. So just
Back to that K-5.
to keep
Back
us
to those skills.
to keep us on time, we're at 45 minutes. So I just wanted to share the steps we're recommending to Superintendent Provenzano. Is that we need to do some review of industry forecasting. So right now, we've done a great job of seeing what's existing in our current schools, but we also have to prepare our students for what the field needs from us, right? And so we need to do some industry forecasting. We're actually going to be working with BOCES on some of that. So that's locally and nationally. And then we also need to visit some colleges and industry locations locally. And we're also going to be doing hopefully some national visits to see some really innovative tech spaces, because sometimes you don't know what you don't know. And I've been introduced to a couple different spaces, one in Colorado recently, one in Mesa, Arizona, that is really at the cutting edge of where we're headed, I think, as a nation. And then based on those things, we'll be developing our curriculum and programming. Of course, we got to stay within our budgets, and redesigning the space as needed, not the structure sides of it, but the stuff Troy says you can play with. That's the stuff we'll move.
You go where your eyes take you, and if you're shooting for the stars and having high expectations and a strong vision, we'll get there. And I think that intentionality is critically important. And initial steps, right? I mean, there's more presentations, more priorities to be expressed, because that's the work. Thank you.
So, quick question.
Oh, sorry.
No,
Sorry,
to-
Peter.
No, just, we're done, right? 1, 2, 3, 2, 4? What's the meaning of that? That's the name of the. Past today? Yes. 1, 23, 24. Well, I Googled it. There's other meanings out there, so I was curious if it was.
That's how Lindsay Reddig labels every single thing with the date. And it keeps her organized. The rest of us are like, I don't know when I made it. She knows,
Sorry,
and that's what matters.
disappointing, right? I expected a code, some peep answer with Steve.
You win a prize if you figured it out.
Listen, I asked the same question.
Thank you.
I thought I've
Yes.
been working 45 minutes here, and I didn't get an answer.
So I know we have to move on to our next presentation, but I did want to thank everybody, and I'm sure we'll hear more.
Even just this new drawing is so pretty. Why do you have to do it? You know we're gonna get something from it. In the courtyard. In the courtyard. Hey Travis, where are we putting this on? I might have to ask your to the far side.
Hopefully they're in the, not the dirty area.
Those aren't
Yeah, I
lifts.
know.
Those aren't lifts. Those are
Can we lift up this on it? Oh yeah, to partner it up. Yeah.
Actually, come closer. Come closer.
Come on down, John.
Come on, yeah, we need you, John.
Did we lose a chair?
Travis took his with him.
We got a whole team.
What happened?
Want me to jump?
Oh, yeah, I was just letting them come down. I was also looking
Thank you, Travis.
where the chairs were.
Come on up. He's like, no. I'm officially a part of this.
They do.
Mark.
I've created such chaos with my wanting everybody at the table. That's okay. I did. Okay, I think
Ready to
everybody's
go?
good. We're
So-
comfortable. We're up to B, and I will hand it over to
Yeah,
you.
this is an exciting project, and it's definitely about planning, being thoughtful in our approach. We know about the mandates regarding EV electric vehicles, and the governor's had some decrees out there with timelines, and we're really trying to be thoughtful and measured so we could be responsive to sustainability initiatives and imperatives out there, and doing it in a way that's fiscally sound and planful. And I think that's a credit to Matt and his team. Matt and his team are constantly saying to me, Brett, slow down, right? And there's lots of moving parts here. So I'm going to hand it off to Matt Stevens, Assistant Superintendent for Business, and he's going to introduce his team and go on from there.
All right, thank you, Mr. Provenzano. So tonight we have with us Jeremy Johnston. Jeremy is with New York Bus Sales. And we have John Kidd, our Director of Transportation, and Pete Marini, our Head Mechanic, and then also sitting back, there's Stephanie Alamo, our Assistant Director over at our Transportation Assistant Director over at the department, and then Andrew with New York Bus Sales, works with Jeremy and his team, and Andrew works closely with our team when it comes to our bus replacement process and so on. So Jeremy's going to run through a presentation that he has here, kind of talk about the EV buses, the mandate, different grant programs, long-range planning, and so forth, as we go through here. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jeremy.
Thank you. We'll see if we're queued up. Okay, so again, I'm Jeremy Johnson with New York Bus Sales. Thanks for having us. I've been doing this for about 15 years, so any questions along the way, let us know. No worries. There we go. So as you mentioned, everybody's familiar with the 2027 mandate that in the state of New York, any school bus purchase has to be electric by 2035. 100% of your fleet has to be electric. So what we really look at is the ecosystem. As you mentioned, we need to look at a long-term approach, looking at the assessment of the sites, the purchasing process, the financing piece, the chargers. It's not just the bus purchase. It's getting your facility upgraded to accommodate the level of chargers that you're going to need for your entire fleet by 2035, and not just a one-size-fits-all capital project for 100% of the chargers. It's a phased approach based on location to the garage, phasing in over time with capital projects instead of that upfront cap cost. Looking at the infrastructure piece as well, what type of chargers, what level chargers, level 2, DC fast charge, combination of both, which chargers are needed to accommodate the runs that you have based on current routing. Vehicle to grid piece, which is sort of a buzzword in the topic now. The deployment of the buses, so once we actually deploy electric buses, making sure that we're thoughtful in our approach to make sure that your technicians are trained, your drivers are trained, first responders are trained, making sure that we don't just deliver a bus and then let you guys figure out the hard way of the do's and don'ts. We also want to make sure that Fairport's already evaluating the telematics that are involved. With the EV piece, there's kind of two sets of telematics. The charging telematics that maintain the chargers themselves, make sure they're 100% charged, but also telematics in terms of check engine lights if they happen, what to do in those situations, making sure we have service and support after we deliver the vehicles, who do you call if there's an issue, and then what do we do at the end of the life in terms of a recycling program. So Fairport specifically has, again, been evaluating, honestly, electric buses since probably 2017, 2018, making sure that it is the right time to evaluate, making sure we're taking advantage of all the grant funding, but also working with Fairport Electric in terms of how much power is on site. how much power you're actually going to need to provide transportation for the first bus purchase if you need any facility upgrades, but also a long-term approach to make sure that you have enough power phased in over time from the utility side as well. The other piece is, obviously, everybody knows that with that beautiful new bus garage that you have, we're going to have to rip a parking lot at some point to make sure that we put conduit in the ground, but we only rip it up once to make sure that we are thoughtful in the approach to where do we run conduit, where do we pull the power, where do we start putting chargers in. Also looking at, again, how are we going to fund the buses. We've mentioned grant programs. What do you qualify for, what don't you qualify for, and we'll kind of go through some of those grants that are available, some that have expired that we've already evaluated. And then also, you've already done a study that looks at the routing, what routes can accommodate electric buses today, which ones are we not able to accommodate, and how can we get creative to make sure we're not jeopardizing sports trips, field trips, some of those things long term. We also looking at purchasing extra spare buses potentially. So if those routes can't be accommodated, you may have to run one bus in the morning and a separate one in the afternoon to make sure that it's feasible to get all those students to their events and sports trips and field trips. And then the last piece is the capital construction needs, what the timeline looks like. So that engineering study that's been completed, I know that we've kind of presented that before from an engineering standpoint. What are the construction costs, what are the costs of the pedestals, and all of those things associated, again, outside of the bus purchase itself, that's incorporated into the project. So this, again, it goes back to 2019, was sort of the first round of state funding. And if you look at those maps, the blue boundaries are what the state refers to as disadvantaged communities. And those are the areas that are primarily targeted to fund that EV bus purchase. It's more the incremental cost between a diesel and an electric, not 100% of the cost. In terms of that, you also had to have a scrap bus to get rid of that was a pre-2010. In Fairport being a proactive with their fleet rotation schedule, you don't have any of those old vehicles in your fleet, so you didn't really qualify for this funding. The second program and the most recent is actually a federal program through the EPA. It's the Clean School Bus Program. What it did was it allocated $5 billion over a 5-year period to implement electric school buses, actually clean school buses, because propane and CNG are funded under this program. $5 billion over 5 years. The first round, what they do is they separate it into priority districts, non-priority districts. The funding levels were different. Fairport was not listed as a priority district. There were no districts awarded that weren't on that priority list for EPA round one. That round closed back in 2022. The second round opened in 2023. This was more of a grant process that you had to write a 15-page narrative basically claiming why Fairport would be a qualifying district for electric buses. It still had that prioritization in terms of high needs, low income, rural communities, and tribal communities. So based on, let me get to that slide here. So this is the background and criteria for that grant itself. It was based on a point scale. It was very complex and time consuming to put together. Based on the time needed, how much time transportation would have to be involved in, not being on the priority list, we didn't apply for that application specifically, just so we didn't waste time. So now we're on round 3, which is currently open. We're currently working with John and the transportation team to finalize that round 3 application. Again, being a non-priority district in this round, we're at least taking the initiative to apply for it. A simpler process here, but at this point, getting close to that 2027 deadline, making sure that we're taking all the proper steps to get any funding that's available. So again, the same qualifications we talked about: the high needs, low income districts, rural communities, and tribal districts. That's why Fairport is not listed on that prioritization list. So that application is due at the end of the month.
Jeremy, just jumping back to the last slide on the funding piece, because we've talked about this a little bit in budget planning. Something we'll need to consider is any grants that we apply for, any balance of the funding, we'll have to budget for that within the general fund. So that's just kind of one of those fiscal planning pieces. Give you an idea, about $400,000 is, or about $800,000 is a percent on the levy. These transportation or buses themselves are an exclusion under the tax cap. But if we're budgeting, depending on how much it is, if we're, if we think 350, 400,000 is going to be about 0.5% on the levy. If we have other exclusions within the capital portion, those will all be factors that we will need to consider in terms of what's the acceptable tax levy we're willing to go out with in any budget year.
Sorry, can you walk me through that again? So
Yep,
say
so-
we have like a 2% normal budget increase, as an example. We would need to go out at 2.5 just to procure one bus potentially.
Correct.
And procure 2 buses, we're going out at 3%.
Right.
Okay.
Yep.
Wow.
So, if we're funding those fully within the general fund, we may have to really look into, are we now going to do serial bonds for buses? Are we going to do long-term borrowings? Right now, we're able to fund buses strictly in the general fund and pay for them in full annually. We're getting that state aid back on the buses. It accounts for approximately $850,000 to $900,000 because buses are right now amortized over 5 years for state aid. The other piece we'll have to consider and think about is that they're shifting the funding for EV buses to be over 13 years, not 5 years. So the state aid will come back at a slower rate than it is currently on the diesel buses that we purchased today, diesel and the gas. So those are just things that as we go through this process that we have on our minds of what in terms of tax increase is going to be feasible, long-term in this process. So we do have one grant out there now that is with the Assembly Office, and I believe now that goes through DASNY, the Dormitory Authority of the State of New York, and there's no award at this point in time, but that'll be something that we'll have to consider budgeting for in 24-25, that difference of between the grant and the cost itself. So we'll see a full cost of the budget because we have to budget on the expense side, and then we'll budget a revenue for the grant itself coming in. So just to, kind of some of the thoughts that we've gone through in terms of the funding side of buses themselves.
Can I ask an infrastructure question, or do we want to get through all this and I can hold it?
Well, no, it's up to you guys. We take questions.
I guess it just occurred to me that the mandate as of right now starts 27. How are we going to be able to have a capital project to build the electric infrastructure at the bus garage, put it together, get SCD approval, vote on it, get it built, get it started by 2027? This is not I'm not criticizing you guys.
We talked about this, and Matt's going to talk about what he envisions, if that's the right word.
Yeah. First, that's a great question.
Yeah.
So time is of the essence as we go through this process for any school district. So we've engaged with Girard Energy to do a fleet study to try to look at our routes and go through that process to see how many can be electrified, where phase in approach of installing the electric chargers. Our next step in the process would be engaging with our architect engineer to start making those connections with Fairport Electric, see what
No pun intended.
correct connections, thanks, yeah, and try to go through that process of, okay, what do we need to do in terms of capital project? Because the initial process that we've gone through with Girard helps us identify the needs and gives us kind of some baseline cost, but we have to go through an SED, we have a voter approval process, SED submission for any of this capital construction work to drive that building aid back on the project itself. So those are all things that would need to take place before having a large fleet, as that process goes through.
So while,
Would there be, I'm sorry, Brett, may I real quick?
of course,
Would there, because the bus, the transportation center is relatively new, would we still be able, this work still be able?
We assume so at this point in time, but those will be questions we ask.
Yeah, that's what
I
I
mean, I would
was-
say, because I would hope that the state would still aid it, because any school district that's gone through a reconstruction of their transportation center in the most recent, time here, to exclude us from building aid on that would just, to me, be unfair.
I think it's a strong point of advocacy, and the information that you've been sharing, it talks about funding sources, not only just state but federal, because I think Erica was over here saying that's going to be a tax burden. So those are pieces that I know that this team here is right on the cusp of the advocacy, going to Albany actually March 4th or something.
And legislative records
Yep, legislative breakfast in February. So I think that's where all that's going to meet, and we're optimistic that it will be free-flowing aid. The goal.
And there are two pieces to that. One is in terms of SED approval on the front side. So every school district in the state is going through the exact, or supposed to be going
Right.
through the exact same process
Yes.
that Fairport is. I'll be honest with you, Fairport is much further ahead than most districts in terms of planning, strategizing, looking at that facility engagement. But again, every single school district in the state has to go through this process. So SED is going to have a backlog in terms of their approval. So that's needs to be factored in as well.
May I ask, does the mandate have a punishment attached to it? Like, okay, I'm just
Like if
Like-
the voters say no.
Yeah,
and-
like-
The only thing I've ever seen, I'm sorry, but the only thing I've ever seen on the mandate was the governor saying it in her State of the State address in 2022, like all schools will be electric buses. That's it.
Yeah, there hasn't been a clear pathway, and I think if you look at any
That's
of our
the
advocacy
advocacy
groups, Matt's group, my group, they're out there saying we need a clear pathway, we need fiscal resources. Again, I think the school boards put out something like
Yep.
storage capacity was, and again,
Yeah, I think from my perspective, talking for advocacy point, like, yes, money, we need aid, we need grants, we need time. That's the thing we need, we need money for everything, but we need time. To expect every district to just magically do this 5 years from the day the government, nope. Yeah,
And
Pete,
it's
you're
not
right.
just
No chance.
districts.
It's not possible. And I don't know if if we're out of compliance with
Well,
this.
my thought is if we have to put another CIP up and we have other priorities as a district for capital work that we need to do, what is going to, if our voters say that it's too much?
So I think
So I think that's a,
we visited the transportation center, I think it was Friday, and from that, it was a really good discussion on, as we go to the legislative components of this era or this time frame we're in, we're going to come up with a really strong sheet of needs and wants, or advocacy, not necessarily our wants, but if we're going to make the mandate, these are the associated costs, these are the things that we need to do, building in time, building in resources. So I'm looking forward to developing that with our internal team here to
Yes.
carry on
And
advocacy.
Jen Lunsford said that at our Zoom advocacy call that we had with the Monroe County School Board, very much stressing to tell your representatives, so telling Senator Brooks, telling Congressman Morelli, everybody, telling them what they need, and I think we know what we need. Yes, I think that's we need
Well,
time
I
to-
also think having time, things may change, right? So there could be something better and new in a few years, different than electric buses. So
Well, 'cause
jumping.
that's because the mandate is for zero emissions, right? It's not
Right,
for
that was my
electric
next,
buses.
right. So that's what I was, yeah. So I
think in terms of our long-term planning, we would have to pick a route. Like, we can't build electric infrastructure and then hope someday propane takes over. Like, we'd have to pick a,
And I
pick a
think we
lane.
need time.
He didn't even laugh at that one. Thank you.
Do you have any insights on?
Yeah, those are all valid points, and the mandate is zero emissions electric buses, so that already doesn't consider propane or any of those clean fuels that exist, but it also doesn't look at any of those long-term goals with,
Right.
I guess, anything outside of electric, whether it be hydrogen fuel cell or
Right.
whatever comes after that. The short term is the only option right now for for zero emissions buses is electric.
So for the sake of time and moving forward, I think these are the right questions that we're all trying to bubble up with, and there's budgetary implications, there's funding implications. I think that's what we're trying to get a freeze frame of. This is where we are currently, and this is where we need to be. So, continue.
Yeah, thank you. So again, we just kind of wrapped up on the EPA round 3. Currently working through that application. Going to have that submitted by next Wednesday because that's the deadline. Again, not a priority district, but again, being fiscally responsible. That's the approach to take, is apply where we can. In terms of scrappage required under the EPA program, yes, it's a 1-for-1 trade. So to purchase an electric bus, you also have to get rid of a diesel bus in your fleet. Yeah, so that one, if you don't have a pre-2010, they're accepting any fuel type, any age. So in terms of charging infrastructure, the funding from round 2 was initially $395,000 total per bus. That's been reduced to $345,000 per bus. Then you also, since you're not a priority district, it's $200,000 per bus. That also covers infrastructure costs. So now you need to determine how much of that $200,000 you're going to spend on infrastructure and how much you're going to put towards the bus purchase itself.
So you're saying as we do these one-offs, because we're trying to understand that, you know, these are the general costs associated with it. Because, you know, even though it's not going to be electrified completely, we have to plan, because it will impact budget and funding sources. So,
And the timing doesn't necessarily always line up with your budget proposals either. So if we apply for this currently, we're not going to get awarded until April, May, which might not hit the approval for the 24-25 school year.
Yeah, so we talked about this one, for example, of looking at 25-26, because to budget a number that's non-existent or unknown at this time, you know, wouldn't really be feasible and reasonable through the tax cap calculation process too. So this, we talked about 25-26 because we have until April of 26 to expend these funds if received.
Quick question. So do we, if we got grant money for infrastructure, do we have to do a CIP? Like if we have that, do we still have to put it out for a vote?
Not out for a vote, but we may, depending on the extent of the work, have to go through SED process for at least approval of the work.
Okay.
which puts you on that time.
Yeah. I was just wondering, do we still have to put it out for a community vote? So if we got grant funding for infrastructure, does it still need to go out to use it?
So the kind of last part of that grant is training costs and consulting are covered. So if we're awarded those funds, some of that $200,000 can be earmarked for training. We as the dealer are going to train drivers, technicians, first responders anyway, but some of those consulting fees, Girard Energy pieces might be able to be tied into that, but you're still limited by that award number of $200,000. So the other funding opportunity that was just released November 29th through NYSERDA is the New York School Bus Incentive Program. Same program with prioritized, non-prioritized districts. You're awarded more money if you're on that priority list. Fairport, again, is not listed on that priority list. So this is kind of the funding breakdown for new school buses. What they're looking at is trying to cover the incremental cost between your diesel and electric and try to cover 60% of the incremental cost. So again, you're still going to have to pay more out of pocket for an electric bus than you would a diesel. This is a revolving door. $500 million was earmarked initially through NYSERDA. This is the first round. We expect changes as it progresses, but we as the dealer have to do this application on the district's behalf. With this piece, and it hasn't officially been announced yet, the infrastructure piece is supposed to, the portal is supposed to be open in February. It's a customer side portal, so that's where the charging infrastructure would come into play for chargers. Any customer side costs, not utility side costs, can be covered under that, which is trenching, conduit, and some of those things. Once we have more details, we'll also try to help the district walk through that as well. So when we talk about school buses themselves, alternative fuels, we mentioned propane, gasoline, diesel, CNG, and electric. Those are the current offerings in the school bus market. School buses aren't new to electric. Bluebird built the first ones back in 1994. Technology has just evolved to the point where it's more feasible. So kind of where we started back in 2016, Bluebird was awarded $4.4 million to look at what they call onboard bidirectional charging, which is taking the energy in the batteries, offboarding it into the utility, charging a building or some of those things. Back then we had the ability to build 4 electric buses in a week. As of just January 1st, we now have the ability to build 20 per day if we can, running 2 shifts. So again,
And
the evolution.
That's awesome. That is still no, I mean, God, you know where I'm going. There's not going to keep up with demand in the state. Not even close.
There are 45,000
yeah.
school buses running in New York State.
How many? I'm sorry.
45,000.
Sorry.
That's currently running in New York State. There's 45,000. Correct. And this is what we as one manufacturer can build 20 per day. So we can't keep up with the demand.
Just real quick, in a couple decades.
If I had a magic ball.
Yeah, we'll have the infrastructure.
But again, it just shows you that it's a slow process. Yes, there's a lot of resources right now in terms of battery technology, but we're still limited by production capabilities as well. So this top one is the current bus that you're purchasing, just an electric version, up to 33,000 GVWR. Range, it says up to 120 miles. In a real world, you're going to get 100. In cold weather, you're going to get downwards of 75 to 80. So again, this comes with that training piece and making sure that we're actually living up to the expectations, and you can accommodate the routes with the current technology as it's evolving.
You've given this to me before.
Yeah, I have been, and I can't even quote it without looking at numbers. Sorry.
75 in that range?
Most of our buses are doing minutes, probably 30 to 50 on average. But then, oh yes.
Depends on temperature and how
Right.
fast they can charge. We have a lot of districts who have EV buses are not getting close to that mileage, especially since it's been cold. I've heard like 50, 45, 50 miles. Again, it depends on how much you run and what your options are on the bus and how much draws electricity.
It gives them little blinkies on the sides.
And that's why, I mean, it does fit school transportation. On a typical in-district run, it goes out in the morning run, comes back, charges midday. Hopefully, depending on the charger that we select, making sure we're being responsible and strategizing, that we use a charger that can get it back to a charge to do the afternoon run. But again, that's focusing on just in-district runs, not including McKinney-Vento, sports trips, field trips, those things.
Well, I don't know if this will help you, but how many runs we got?
We're up to in the neighborhood of 75, 80.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Mike's.
Sorry. So we have 75 to 80 runs, and with our study, we can only do 40,
I think it was 43
43 buses in the fleet
currently.
with the technology today. So that's all we could do, even if hopefully technology gets better.
Yeah, I mean, the technology is continuing to improve, but is it going to improve fast enough to allow us to
That was the whole basis
do
of
this?
that study the state put out, right, is by 2027, yes, the technology will have improved, but that's an assumption at this
Right.
point.
Right.
Like,
I know. It's so tricky. And we'll instantly make 45,000.
Well, and when you're dealing with hopefully they charge and hopefully they do, you don't want to have if your kid's on that bus, that's a hopefully getting charged, you know.
And is the place we're going to have chargers?
Well, again, the stick, it says
I think- I mean, this-
2035 full fleet, but
Yeah.
would we be wise to keep 10, 20
Oh,
diesel buses as backup,
we're
right?
not currently allowed to.
I understand, but if there's no
2035.
stick, as you've asked,
Yeah.
Well, yeah, that's what I mean.
Right.
Well, and my also
the wisdom side.
the flip
If
side
an
of that,
electric bus dies on the side of the road and we send a diesel one to pick kids up, like they're gonna
write us a ticket.
yeah,
Like,
yeah.
No. But that is part of it, you know, as we're looking at this and we're looking at costs, if they attach a fine to it, that's a
Well,
decision to be made.
I think that number, we could do 40 runs, 43 runs, or whatever of our daily runs. That's information for our legislatures too, because that's concrete data. That's not, well, you should be able to do it. Like, no, that's only half our runs that we can legitimately accomplish with
And
the
imagine
technology.
rural districts.
Oh yeah.
And that speaks to, again, needing the clarity from
Yeah.
from the state with a blueprint to get
Yeah.
there, that includes funding and all the variables that we're talking about.
I mean, I think, I always feel like it's worth mentioning, like, this is a good thing that doing electrifying buses, getting better for the planet, better for all of us. It's what we want. Like, it's one of our goals as a board. It's something we do, but it is
Practical.
it's not feasible given the current time frame. It's just not feasible. And I just keep coming back to that time aspect. Like, the
Well,
money is the
it's-
money,
yeah.
but there was a great thing I sent the board a NISBA advocacy thing, and it was California is starting in 2035.
Right.
Like, just like the 2027 date for New York is 2035, and they're like, that's California, which has much better weather, and yeah, so much better weather, so they don't have the cold weather charging issues that we have here, and they have more time. And I think that I just keep coming back to that piece of it,
Well, and I think it's not just schools, right? So I know Rochester, the city,
So, yeah.
did stuff.
RTS
Well,
switched,
they
but
started to.
They started to. They also have, I looked this up because I was curious, they have
Mhm.
200 buses in Monroe County in their entire fleet. We have 110 in Fairport alone. So, I mean, it's more feasible for an RTS probably to do it because they have fewer buses to purchase.
I think
and
the
less route.
infrastructure is the issue, though, in
Oh,
terms
yeah,
of, yeah.
everything's the
So
issue.
it's
Yes.
just,
Pick one.
yes. So slow, I guess, is the
Continue.
theme.
Yep.
But honestly, all of that ties into the approach that the team at Fairport has taken into consideration. All of these factors, looking at what the feasibility is short-term versus long-term. I mean, this is the approach to take and making sure you're strategic in your decisions.
This
and-
is the one.
You all have seen this slide before, I believe, just the impact on cold weather. This is current lithium-ion technology. We're not using anything different. This is what every automotive manufacturer is using currently. If you've seen the videos of some of the electric vehicles in Chicago that couldn't charge, they were being pushed around. This is no different. We are using the same technology.
So the weather gets below 32 here. We have a, oh, wait. Never mind.
And again, there are things that are built into the vehicle itself.
Of course, yeah. Yeah. But
But again, it's just making sure that you're partnering with an organization that has those strategies, a reputable organization that will be here long term. Everybody's heard the name Cummins. They've been manufacturing diesel engines for over 100 years. If they're getting involved in the transition, it's a good name to have behind you supporting that network. But again, it's looking at that strategy in terms of what works, what doesn't work. We've learned over time in partnering with Girard Energy, there are certain parking lot configurations that are not efficient. Putting things in a shed isn't efficient. Making sure that if we put ballards up, it's not necessarily efficient because now somebody has to use a snow blower and go around all of those posts to clean it up. Just things like that we're learning over time. We're not there yet either. But again, just some pictures of the different deployments and things that we have to do to get creative given the environment that you're in and the parking lot configurations. So again, the last piece is we as the dealer are going through the exact same process that you have to. We have to install chargers at our facilities. We built a brand new facility in Batavia, New York, 20,000 square feet. We have 22 chargers on site. It's in the works to actually have administration come out and take a tour on what we have done, learn from some of the mistakes that we've made, because we certainly absolutely made mistakes along the way as well. But just trying to promote that long-term approach, making sure that the project you put in front of your voters today is going to be the long-term solution.
thing on cinder blocks, though. I can just imagine going up, showing our taxpayers seeing that after spending all this money on chargers and cables and all the infrastructure and all the buses and
transformers,
and then it's sitting on cinder blocks.
So I think the next part of this process, you know, as we can continue to learn more about what it takes to go through an architectural engineering assessment to complement this work, continuing to go at the grant pieces. And the advocacy piece, I think, is probably more important than any of those components because it's going to hopefully, you know, add some practicality to the lawmakers. So we'll be ready to do that, and I know the board will be a strong voice in that.
And I keep bringing this up, but I would love to see the advocacy piece shared with the community as well, so they can write to our representatives and, you know, whatever their view is of, you know, move the timeline up, or I'm happy to pay all my taxes to it, or, you know.
Well, we have some
but I'm
sustainability
assuming
leaders
many
here.
people will be concerned
And I
about
think
that
that would be
huge
great
tax.
for our sustainability committee. I
Yeah.
mean, just we'll get the facts out there, and we'll get a team. And nobody does it better than our community, that's for sure. When we're rallies.
And I know last year when we were there, I'm looking to see if Jan, were you in the meeting with, yeah, so there was a lot of conversations when we went last year to meet with representatives in Albany, and they had talked about a survey that had gone to each school district. Yeah, I know you guys completed it. I don't know that they've, yeah, I don't know if they've actually done anything with it. Do you happen to know?
So it's supposed to be an annual survey that's
Right.
done from every school district, more of a pulse check on
Right.
what's your status in the transition to electrification, what have you done thus far. When you look at some of the funding that the state has released, they're incentivizing districts to have a fleet electrification plan, which looks at 90% of the things that Fairport has already done. The
Mhm.
last piece is just evaluating a rotation schedule in terms of replacing your buses to the electric piece. that's the last part that Fairport just hasn't done yet, because you're just not ready, because you don't know what the long-term goal is.
So, kind of getting back to Brett, what you were saying about the advocacy piece, and I'm gonna be a broken record on this time aspect on it, but you know, when during our Zoom advocacy call, the conversation about electric buses was lacking a lot, and you know, I think a lot of the lawmakers, even ones who would be supportive, were very much like, yeah, well, it's not going to change, so tell us what you need. And like that, we've got to say this has to change. There's no way. Whether we as Fairport can do it is irrelevant. The state, not,
Right.
it is impossible for the state to do
What's
it.
frustrating about it, it's become a political pawn rather than this is how we're.
Yes.
Thank you, team.
Thank you so much.
Always is. Appreciate it.
Thank you for coming. Also, thanks for having us earlier
with a
last
number
week
on
to
it or a
tour.
calendar?
Oh, no, a number. Just a number.
And then
We're
she'll
like,
lift
sure,
it
if
up
you give
and
me
look at it real quick and then
Go. Be like, well,
School bus electrification plan.
Thank you. Okay, we actually do not have an executive session. So we're gonna move to our closing and adjourn. So I need a motion that the meeting be adjourned. Jan, Brian, all in favor? Aye. If you were listening from home, all our many viewers, we will be taking a short break for a half hour, and then we will return to our board business meeting. So you can join us then.